Table Talk, an open and honest discussion about different topics related to faith.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Table Talk, an open and honest discussion about different topics with different opinions. Please, again, come and join us and take a seat at the table. This week, we've got a very special guest. We have Pastor Scott here with us. So I guess to get started, I guess you can introduce yourself and just kind of tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, I'm Scott Sharman, and I'm the senior pastor here at Alsbury Baptist, position I've held for 25 years. Married to Phyllis, 2 adult kids, 6 grandkids. Love to hunt and fish and ride a bike, go for jogs through the neighborhood. That's it.
Awesome, just that. All right, and I guess we'll jump into it.
Okay.
So, whenever when Alsbury was in the beginning stages, how did Alsbury become a thing? How did you realize you were going to move into a new church? How did you realize you were going to start something completely different? How did you realize you were going to be pastor? What called you to this position?
Okay, I was the pastor at Calvary Baptist Church here in town. Calvary was about 40 years old at the time. It was a mission of First Baptist Church, Burleson. I often describe it as a sleepy little church off of the old town part of Burleson. We were doing 60, 70 people on the average Sunday morning in worship and discipleship. There were some things happening there. We were doing some short-term mission trips, but there wasn't anything really significant taking place. And then there was a group of individuals in the church that did a Bible study that's, it's a well-established study, Experiencing God. And they began to wrestle with the question about joining God where He's at work. And they began to think, to envision another church here in Burleson, a church that Calvary would be involved with planting, and kind of moved through the church, came to a business meeting. There was a unanimous vote of the church to begin a new church across town from the Calvary position. But the motion was kind of unique. If it wasn't unanimous, we weren't going to go. And so it had to be the whole church saying that we were going to go start a new church. And so it was kind of a relocation because it was a whole church saying we want to go. But we had things written into the vote. For instance, nobody who was a part of Calvary could serve in a place of leadership here at Alsbury. So we didn't want it to be just a relocation. We wanted it to take on its own personality. And I was excited because I wanted to be a part of something new, something that had a lot of potential to reach people with the gospel.
Cool. So when Alsbury first began, you guys were over in the modular buildings at Taylor.
Well, actually in the gym and in the cafeteria.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So all of that, with all of the, not really having your own space, what was the most difficult part of that, of being not only somewhere new, but being somewhere that wasn't really your own space?
Yeah, the most challenging thing about it actually involved the space, and probably not the way you might anticipate. We had to move things in every day for worship services. We had to bring in all the, set up the chairs. We had to bring in the sound equipment and things like that. But that's not what I mean by the most challenging with the space. It was the idea that the church is in that space. The challenge that I faced then and have faced over the 25 years since then is that the church isn't this gathering on Sunday morning for an hour or two, but the church is what we're doing every day as we're ministering all over the community, and that the Sunday events are the church coming together. The scattered church coming together for worship and discipleship. And so it was always a battle that, we did church and we'll see you again next week kind of thing. So it doesn't matter what the building is. Doesn't matter where the facility is. It was a mental thing.
So, after a little bit of time, we ended up building this building, I guess the youth room now. I guess youth and kids, I guess technically.
Right.
So, after being over at Taylor for a while, when did you guys decide it was time for a building of your own? And what did it take for you guys to realize, we've got property, we've got all these things working for us. Let's get a building where we can, call it our own space. What was that deciding factor?
Well, and that was a continuation of that problem. The land that we sit on, which is about 5 acres of land, was owned by the Baptist General Convention of Texas. It had been owned by the Johnson Association, Baptist Churches of Johnson County, and they couldn't pay the interest. It was expensive in those days. They couldn't pay the interest on the property, and so the state convention took it over. And so everyone wanted a new church over in this part of town, and we were approached, when I was at Calvary, we were approached by the director of missions of our association to consider this church plant over here. And so it was meeting the needs that the state had, and that was to get rid of the property. They wanted a church here. It met the needs of a missions arm of the state convention. They wanted a new church planted. It kind of fit into what we were wanting to do in terms of a vision for a new church. But see, that's what I was describing a moment ago. The church quickly began plans for building a building. And if I had it all to do over again, we would have really delayed moving on to this property. We could have gone ahead and bought it and began making the payments on it, things like that. It was actually sold to us for what it had been whittled down to in terms of the debt, down to $90,000. So it was way, way under the appraised value. So we could have maintained that. We could have handled the financial challenge. The problem was we moved out of the school into this building 2 years after we started. And there was, you could almost feel it. You could almost identify the emotion. People had this attitude, we've arrived. And this effort of reaching out into the community, the effort of connecting with your neighbors, just kind of came to a stop because, we don't have to invite people to come to the school anymore. We don't have to encourage people to drive by so many existing churches with programs and stuff and come to an elementary school and meet with us in a temporary facility. Now we have our own building. And I think it was detrimental to our long-term vision. It was the idea that church is a building. And it was a nice building. It's been a great building. It was well designed, very useful. But it should be a tool that is used by a church that is involved in ministry every day of the week, not simply a building to meet in. And again, if I had to do over again, knowing now, or knowing then what I know now, I would have encouraged our church to delay building until we really had that understanding that the building is not what makes us a church. It's the Spirit of God working through us that makes us the church.
So with the building of the gym, was the hope to kind of change that thought process of, now we have a place where people can come and do different things and we can still reach out into the community? Was that a hope to kind of change that thought that we're here, we're just kind of hanging out? Was there any kind of hope with building the gym now that we've got it up and we've been using it for a few years now?
Yes, that was part of the mentality. You got to kind of look at that about 18 to 20 year window in between those two of building this building. I guess it's more like about 16 to 18 years between building this building and building the other building, because there was a shift in our philosophy of ministry. It was a few years that we struggled with that identity that the church is about this building. And then we actually went through a change of worship leadership. And it was the man, Daryl Avenshine, who came in and led our worship that really changed our thought process. He challenged the church every week to think beyond the walls and to engage in ministry outside of this place. And the church very much embraced that challenge and began to do that. And then we were offering 3 worship services at that time on Sunday morning, and so there was a lot of people coming to this place. This building could only handle about 200 people, really. It was very full at 200 people. So a realistic number was more like 160 to 180 was a comfortable number. And all 3 services didn't run that big, but we had services that did. And we began to notice people would walk in the building, this back door. They would walk in the building and look around and see the crowd, and they would turn and leave. And some of those were guests. We had no idea about their spiritual experience, and so we really began to wrestle through the idea we've got to build larger meeting space. Again, if I had to do over again, I think maybe we would have added more services, Friday services, Saturday night services, Sunday after lunch services. Because when we moved in the bigger building, the intimacy of this smaller space with a good crowd of people was replaced by a very large space where people weren't quite as connected, and the feel of church, of doing worship, the feel changed dramatically. And, then there's these new challenges that arose, budget challenges, vision, unity, unity of our vision. Those challenges arose, and we actually declined in attendance after we built that building. I think part of it was because of the loss of the enthusiasm when you saw so many people coming together in one place. It really did change the DNA of our church. And I don't know that we've used the building. We built it with the idea we can meet Sunday morning in a large gathering, but then we can use our facility every day of the week to do outreach into the community, do basketball and volleyball and the various other activities that can take place in a gymnasium. And I don't know that we've really done that well. It's multiple times that we've tried to do it, and you run into that problem of it becoming just a recreational facility and not a place of real purposed outreach of helping people to find Jesus.
So, I guess along with the lines of, you talked a little bit about Daryl. So, as of staff of the church, you have been, here throughout all of it, throughout everything. But we've had several staff members come and go with Daryl left and started Southside, and then we had Brock come in. There was the whole tragedy with BJ, and Tim had to step in and took that role with leadership. Gene came in and has been here for a while, but
20 years.
For that very beginning part, it was just you and I would assume some volunteers that were helping with kids. So what has it been like to be, the only constant face throughout all the years? Whether that's how has it been for people to come and go? How has it been working with all these different staff members and all the different styles of, Brock and Daryl are 2 very different people.
Yes, they are.
Has it been challenging to work with them separately? What has it been like to work with so many different people and work in so many different ways?
Yeah, the challenge, and it's not one that I've stepped up to well, I don't think, over the years, but the challenge is to make sure that every staff member is very unified in the understanding of what the church is about. And when you bring people in, it's impossible not to see things through the lens of your personal experience. And so you can use the same language, but you mean different things when you use those same words. And so that's been a challenge, over the years, is to make sure we're all on the same page. And again, I don't know that I've done that really well. I make a lot of assumptions that we understand each other. I'm not sure that we always do. But that's just because I look through my lens too. I think people understand what I'm saying, and they think I understand what they're saying, and maybe we don't always speak the same language, even though we're using the same words. One of the challenges that came to me in the earliest days of our church, we had actually just moved into this building. I had a coach that helped me in church planting. And this coach told me, what you're going to need to be prepared for is that all the people that are with you today, in 10 years, none of them will be here. And I remember looking at him surprised and saying, that just will never happen, because I I really felt like people, having gone through the elementary school experience, were very committed to the vision. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, well, Scott, you need to understand that they think they're committed. And you think they're committed, but you're committed to different things. And he said, you know what your vision is, and they think they understand your vision, but they may not. And when all of a sudden the church moves in a direction that they didn't anticipate, but it's consistent with your vision, they'll back away. And that was true. I didn't believe at the time, but that's absolutely been true. That over the years, people that I thought, they're absolutely plugged into this place as their church family, that they are committed to this family. When things changed a little bit, when it wasn't consistent with what they envisioned the church to be, they just kind of stepped away. And so when new people come in, again, they didn't have the 25 years experience, and so they come in with the assumption of what church is supposed to be. And that's the big challenge, is getting everyone unified. Not unity in the sense of we don't argue with each other. Unity in the sense that we have the same vision, that we know where we're going, we know what the destination looks like. And that's a difficult thing to communicate. It's a difficult thing to hear, just through the language we use.
So over the years, has that vision changed or shifted, or maybe you've added some things to it? And with the bringing in of new people, of guests coming and then staying, with the way that the church has changed, has the vision changed? Maybe have you changed in the way that you pastor, I guess, would be the way, maybe not in the way that you teach, but just in the way that you interact with the people around. How has the church atmosphere changed over the years as things have
Yeah, that's a
moved
great
around?
question. And I don't think the vision has changed. Our steadfastness in focusing on that vision changes all the time. Sometimes we really are, fully committed to it, and sometimes we kind of lose our zeal in terms of fulfilling that. From the earliest days, our vision could have been expressed as helping people to serve God in the Spirit's power, with the idea of people becoming fully devoted followers of Jesus, which means serving Him with your gifts and your talents and abilities, and doing it within the context of the church. Again, over the years, every time you bring a new family into the church, which we always rejoice over. I mean, that's the goal, is that people would unite with a community of believers and grow together and serve together. Mm-hmm. I've always said that every time a family comes into our church, we're a little bit more complete, because they bring a unique combination of gifts and abilities that we didn't have before they arrived. But again, they bring in their past experience of church. And if they were at a really big church where the staff trained people to do ministry, they understood that really well. If they were from a small church where the staff did the ministry, that's what they anticipate. And so it doesn't really matter the size of the church, it's what you came into the church with a vision of that kind of impacts your expectation. And that's the frustrating thing for me, is that people often have their expectation as opposed to, what is Jesus calling all churches to do? And that's to represent Him to the community. Yes, come together, strengthen each other, edify one another, disciple one another, grow with one another. But that's not the goal. The goal is that we might be a really effective ministry within the community and beyond, all over the world. And so maintaining that is really difficult, really difficult. And people get disappointed sometimes, because things weren't what they expected it to be. And they have a hard time, asking, well, are my expectations wrong? It's not because they're bad people or anything. It's just that's all they know. Yeah. And so to think outside of that box is really difficult. It's hard to think of something you've never experienced. And so if church has always been a certain way, that's just what you expect this church to be. And when it's not, then you become disappointed. And, that's been the challenge over the years. So
as people come and people go, have you felt like the needs of the people or the needs of our church have changed, or have they stayed the same throughout the years? Have they stayed, we need, fellowship? If that was the view from all the way back at Taylor, has it stayed the same all the way now that we're in the gym?
Yeah.
Has it?
No, it's changed a lot over the years, and it's probably the one area that I think affects the church most negatively, and that is the consumer-driven spirit of Americans. We in America, every decision we make, it seems, is made on the basis of what do I get out of this? Mm-hmm. We purchase things, we invest in things, we engage in activities, all with ourselves as the center. What do I get out of this? How does this help me? How does this help my family? People will look at a church today and they'll ask, what kind of programs do you have for your kids? I understand how important those questions are, but I think the more healthy question is, how could I be used by God to minister to kids? Does that, you see the difference in
Yeah.
And so this idea of it's all about me, it's what's in it for me, that the music is supposed to minister to me, whereas music is supposed to exalt Christ. Mm-hmm. It's supposed to, lead us into worship. Well, if it's not the style I like, well, then the church isn't good.
Yeah.
Or if our life groups are small instead of large, that's not good, because I want a large group where I can kind of be anonymous in it, where a life group is supposed to be a place where people really grow with each other to the point that they can share their burdens with each other. And so when people have these unrealized expectations, they leave. And that may be the part of being a pastor that is the most painful. People who say, boy, the Lord has led me here. And then in the not too distant future, when the church isn't quite what they expected it to be, they say, well, I need to go somewhere else. And it causes me to often ask people, are you really hearing from the Lord? Because if the Lord wants you here, the Lord knew what the church was like. And he may have brought you here to help us to become, richer and deeper and more meaningful in terms of ministry. And it's frustrating. People who have, I've shared a lot of life with, and then they leave out of a sense of my needs are not being met. It really hurts. It's hard to build relationships with people and then have them kind of break those relationships off.
So, has the heart of the church changed? We just talked about the needs of people and how they feel like sometimes their needs aren't being met, but has the heart and what the general consensus of the church is of, this is what we're here to do. I guess we could call it the goal as well. Has that changed and evolved as we've moved?
Yes, and when you go back to the very beginning days, again, the vision was to start a new church to reach a part of the community that was not being ministered to. When this church began, Alsbury didn't go all the way through. Alsbury ended right here because the city hadn't completed it. So there was nothing between here and the railroad tracks, down to the east. And so this was a new part of town. All these houses that are across the street, they weren't there. So this was a rapidly growing area of Burleson, and a group of people who owned a building free and clear, no debt. They owned that place, that ministry. They chose to deed that property over to the association. They didn't sell it. They deeded it to the association to use for church planting. And then they came over here and started a new church. And the vision was very much reaching out, reaching beyond ourselves, reaching a community in need of Christ. Over the years, it's been a challenge to keep the vision that way. And I do think it's changed. It's changed multiple times. We gain it for a while, we kind of lose it for a while, we gain it. But I believe that right now, we are back to kind of wrestling with that vision of why did God plant a church here? What is our purpose? We look around ourselves now, and there are many, many people saying, I'm not seeing a radical transformation of individuals' lives. I see a lot of people connecting with each other. I see a lot of people sharing life together. But what's missing is this very clear evidence that the Spirit of God is at work. And people are hungry for that. They desire to see that happen. I believe that God is bringing us back to that initial vision of this church isn't here for me. I'm here within this church so that I can be used by God to reach those who have never darkened the doors, never even heard of an Alsbury Baptist church. I believe we're getting back to that vision. I hope so. I mean, only time will tell. But I believe more and more people are understanding the importance of prayer, the power that comes in fasting and focusing upon what God wants to do. Saying no to my own desires so that we can reach people who have yet to come to Christ and meet their needs and grow with them so that they can find a rich life in Jesus.
So you kind of touched on a little bit of the more challenging parts of being a pastor of a church, but I guess maybe if you have some more, you can touch on them as well. But what have been some of the most rewarding parts of being here at Alsbury and being the pastor for so long?
Yeah, there have been many, many people over 25 years of a church, many people who have come out of really difficult situations and found Jesus. From time to time, I get notes from people who have left, because they've moved away or they're off doing ministry somewhere else, and they have responded in their notes to me about the church being the place where God met them, brought them into his kingdom. I think of one couple in particular that came into our church during a time of great personal difficulty, and our church was walking through a time of difficulties when BJ was lost. And we were grieving and they were grieving, and they said, God put us in the right place where we could be supported as we grieved, and we could support others as they grieved. And they grew. They met Christ here. They didn't know Christ when they came. They came out of their hurt, and then they found Jesus, and they grew exponentially in terms of their relationship with Jesus. And they represent many, many others through the years that have truly encountered the life-changing power of Jesus Christ. We've had drug addicts set free. We've had marriages restored. I've seen things happen that can only be explained as the work of the living God. And that's what encourages me tremendously. That's what keeps me going. Because ministry, pastoral ministry is a challenging thing. And, I'm human, I'm frail, I make a lot of mistakes. A lot of people think, pastors, they got it all together. No, pastors do not have it all together. And my family is not the ideal family that people need to follow. We try to walk together, we try to love each other and support each other, but we make mistakes just like anyone else. And the joy is seeing what God is doing in us, that he's doing it in other people too, helping us to overcome ourselves, helping us to be set free from the things that hold us in bondage, and being set free to the point that we can serve him fully and completely. The discouraging thing is people who, come into a church, you kind of care for them, you support them through a challenge, and then, down the road they leave with this sense of, the church hasn't done anything for me lately, that kind of an idea. And, again, it's that consumerism idea. It's all about me. And I'm just mindful that Paul writes in 2 Corinthians chapter 1 about how God comforts us in all of our troubles, so that we, with the comforts we've received, can be a source of comfort for others. God never does his work just to set us up on a shelf and like a trophy. He does a great work in us that we then can be used by him in great ways in the lives of other people. And what hurts sometimes is people who just miss that. And then when you run into them in the community, they literally avoid you. I've been in Walmart before, walking down the aisle, and there's someone, and they'll turn when they see me, and you know me well enough. I just kind of go to wherever they went to try to encounter them again, to say, hey, what's up with this? Why are we doing this? But, relationships should be deep and meaningful, and we do this together. So that's both the joy and the sorrow of being a pastor.
So I guess to kind of wrap up, like a final question, we're in some uncharted territory right now, with having to move more technology-based and having to continue this community even without, face-to-face interaction, which is what the Bible tells us to strive for, what the Bible tells us that we need. And even as people, we crave that interaction.
We do. We are created that way.
So how are things going to change for you? How are things gonna be, are they going to end up being worse? Are they going to be better? Do you think Christ will thrive here in this situation? Do you think maybe we might take a little bit of a hit as a church? How do you think God will move? How do you think you will evolve as we move through this weird situation we've been put in?
Well, I think God is stripping away the things that don't matter. Because there's a lot of stuff we do as a church, a lot of activities, busyness, okay? We get people really busy with all the different activities and the different meetings and things like that. And the outcome may not be at all what Jesus is called for. The church primarily focuses on 5 areas, worshiping together, discipling one another, joining our hearts together in a common purpose. We use fellowship for that, a shared commitment to a common purpose. Ministry, caring for the needs of people, and then missions, reaching out to folks. And I think the Lord He is helping us to strip away things that are really not necessary and to focus very much on those 5 areas that a church is supposed to engage in to the glory of Christ. And I'm praying, Ethan, that at the end of this, we as a church will come out with a much clearer understanding of who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to do. Because the day will come back where things will kind of get back to normal. I mean, it's going to happen. We'll be meeting again. I hope when we meet together again, we'll value the relationship we have with other people. That, coming together on a Sunday morning is a time of celebration and a time of just great joy as we do have that opportunity. And it's not the climax of the church. It's not the 1 hour a week, and then when we're done, we say, okay, we've done church now. But it's because we've been doing those other 4 areas of the church, and then we come together for worship on that Sunday morning, that it's just a glorious opportunity. And a reminder that church is not about 1 hour that we gather together on a Sunday. And church is not just, I read my Bible every day. It's being the people of Jesus. It's walking in obedience to what Jesus has called us to. It is following Him faithfully together, supporting one another. I support you when you're weak, and you support me when I'm weak. But together, we're moving forward to be the church that God's called us to. It is my prayer, and I'm joined by many, many others who are praying that God would make the most of these really odd days in all of our lives to help us to understand more fully what Jesus has called us to. I'm optimistic.
One of the things that we've had, as a constant here the last couple episodes is that we really have pigeonholed what church is supposed to be. Last week we talked about what worship is supposed to be, and we really, we have our set expectations. And,
yes.
I think it just speaks volumes to have, the person that everyone considers you're the main voice of the church, and you're talking about all these expectations and all these things that we believe that the church is supposed to be. Maybe what we believe is not lining up with what Christ tells
absolutely.
us. And that we should, change our understanding and change our thoughts.
Much of what we do as a church family, much of what the church does in North America is far more influenced by the culture than by the Scripture. And I'm hoping that in these days of isolation, days of creative connection, it's moving us back to understanding that it's not what the culture is calling us to that's important. What's important is what Jesus is calling us to.
Mm-hmm. So, I guess thank you for joining me on this episode of Table Talk.
Thank you.
I just want to kind of say, last week we talked about it, and this week Scott said the same thing of we should be anticipating meeting together again. We should be waiting and eagerly be seeking that time again. And until we have that time where we meet again, let's continue to meet here, meet on Wednesdays when we do Burn, meet on Sunday mornings whenever Brock and Scott are doing the service as normal. meet, individually with other people from our life groups, or continue to have that conversation about God. Keep Christ in your daily life.
Amen.
So, again, thank you for joining us for Table Talk. Thank you for coming and taking a seat at the table with us. Make sure to leave a comment down below if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover. Send a text to me or to Tim to tell us, things that we could do to maybe shape this a little bit better, or change what's going on. But again, thank you for joining us. See you guys again next week.